Hello students, Jinali Shah welcomes you all on behalf of Saraswat International Academy. Today we will begin with the last part of the chapter Reproduction in Organisms. Students, in the previous video we were studying regarding the sexual reproduction. So we have studied what sexual reproduction is. The process of reproduction which involves the formation of gametes as well as their fusion resulting in the formation of zygote. That process is called as the sexual reproduction. We have also seen that as the fusion of gametes takes place, the offsprings are not similar to the parents as well as they are not similar amongst themselves. We have seen that the process of sexual reproduction is divided into three stages. First one is the pre-fertilization events, second one is fertilization, and the third one is the post-fertilization events. All the events occurring in the sexually reproducing organisms before the fertilization process is called as pre-fertilization events, which was further divided into two categories. One is gametogenesis and another one is the gamete transfer. We were basically studying regarding the gametogenesis, that is formation of the gametes. In that we have studied the types of the gametes as well as we have studied regarding the sexuality in organism. Now let us continue the same topic, that is gametogenesis. So today first of all let us study which type of cell division occurs during the gamete formation. So our first topic is cell division during the gamete formation. Now gametes in all heterogametic species, hetero different. So those organisms which are heterogametic, that is which produces two morphologically distinct types of the gametes. In them there are two types of gametes. One is the male gamete and another one is the female gamete. We have studied this in types of gamete. The male gamete is called antherozoid or sperm, female gamete is called as egg or ovum. The gametes are always haploid. Keep this in mind, always the gametes are haploid. But the parent body which produces the gamete, that is the organism which is going to produce that gamete, it may be haploid or diploid. Gametes are very important thing. Gametes are always haploid. But the body or the organism which is going to produce that gamete, their body may be either haploid or diploid. Though the parent plant body from which they arise may be either haploid or diploid. Now suppose the parent body is haploid. So in them the mitotic division will take place to give rise to the gamete. Whereas if the parent body which is producing the gamete is diploid, that is containing 2n number of chromosomes, then in them always meiotic division will take place to form the gametes. Keep this in mind. The body which produces the gamete, the organisms which produces the gamete may be haploid or diploid, but gametes are always haploid. So if the organism is haploid and that organism is producing the gamete, then it will undergo mitotic division. And if an organism is diploid, then it undergoes meiotic division to produce the haploid gametes. A haploid parent produces the gametes by mitotic division. So very important thing, how the haploid organism produces the gamete? By mitotic division. Now the question arises, does it mean that those organisms which have the haploid body won't undergo meiotic division in their life cycle? Does it mean that those organisms which have the haploid body will never undergo the meiotic division? So the answer to this question is no. So does this mean that meiosis never occurs in organisms that are haploid? The answers to this question is no. Meiosis will occur in the haploid organisms or in the haploid cells. How? We will see that. Now we know that haploid organism, it produces gametes by mitotic division. Now as we are concerned with the sexual reproduction, The very important step of the sexual reproduction is fertilization. So what happens? There will be the fusion of the gamete. The male and female gametes will fuse and it will result in the formation of a zygote. This zygote of course will be which type of cell? A diploid cell. Now the parent body is which type of body? Haploid. And zygote which is formed is which type of cell? Diploid. So here the zygote will undergo meiosis, form the haploid cells, and these haploid cells will now form the haploid organisms. So these gametes are fused by fertilization to produce zygote which is diploid. The zygote or diploid cell undergoes meiotic division again to produce the haploid organism. So even in the organisms which are haploid and are reproducing by sexual reproduction, in them the meiosis will take place, and it will be which type of meiosis? It will be zygotic meiosis. Several organisms belonging to Monera, fungi, algae, bryophytes, they have haploid plant body. Very important for MCQs. Which organisms have the haploid plant body? So they are monerans, fungi, algae and bryophytes. Whereas the organisms belonging to pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms and most of the animals including the human beings, in them the parental body is diploid. It is obvious that meiosis, that is the reduction division, has to occur if a diploid body has to produce the haploid gamete. So haploid organism produces the gamete by mitosis, diploid organism produces the gametes by meiosis. In diploid organisms, the specialized cell called myocyte, which are also called as the gamete mother cell, they undergo meiosis. So in diploid organisms, there are gamete forming cells called as gamete mother cells or myocytes, and these myocytes will undergo meiosis and form the gametes. At the end of meiosis, only one set of chromosomes get incorporated into each gamete. So that is very important thing. Now what is the relationship between the number of chromosome in myocytes and gametes? So very important relationship is there. It is the myocytes which undergo the meiotic division to form the haploid gametes. Now as meiotic division is the reductional division, so number of the chromosomes in the gamete will be half the number of chromosomes in the myocytes. Are you getting my point? Myocytes undergo meiotic division to form the gametes. So as meiotic division is a reductional division, the number of chromosomes reduces to half. So number of the chromosomes in the gamete will be half the number of the chromosomes in the myocytes, or we can say number of the chromosomes in the myocyte is double the number of the chromosomes in the gametes. Myocytes are the cells undergoing meiotic division to produce the gamete. The number of chromosomes in gametes is half the number of chromosomes in the myocytes. That is, number of chromosomes in myocyte is 2 multiplied by number of chromosomes in gametes. Gametes are formed after meiosis and haploid in nature. Thus, the chromosome of myocyte is double the chromosome of the gamete. Clear? So, the chromosome number of myocyte is double than the number of the chromosomes in the gamete. Very important thing. Now, this is the chart showing the number of myocytes and gametes in some of the organisms. So, in human beings, the number of the chromosome in the myocyte is 46. So, of course, in gamete will be 23. In housefly it is 12 and in gamete it is 6. In rat, in myocyte it is 42 and in gamete it is 21. From the table it is clear that in myocyte the chromosomes number is double the chromosome number of the gamete. Dog, it have 78 chromosomes in myocyte and 39 in gamete. Cat have 38 in myocyte, 19 in gamete. Fruit fly have 8 in myocyte and 9 in gamete. Ophioglossum, which is one of the fern, have 1260 in myocyte and 630 in gamete. Apple 34 in myocyte, 17 in gamete. Rice 24 in myocyte, 12 in gamete. Maize 20 in myocyte, 10 in gametes. Potato 48 in myocyte, 24 in gamete. Butterfly 380 in myocyte and 190 in gamete, and finally onion have 32 in myocyte and 16 in gamete. So this table is very important for you students. Clear? Now, the second important step of the pre-fertilization event is gamete transfer. So, of course, after the formation of gametes, they need to be transferred. Then only they will fuse and result in fertilization. So, again it is very important event called as gamete transfer. After their formation, male and female gametes must be physically brought together to facilitate their fusion, that is fertilization. In majority of the organisms, male gamete is motile and female gamete is stationary. In most of the organisms, the condition is male gamete is motile, it can move, whereas female gametes are stationary. But here there are some exceptions like few fungi and algae where both the types of the gametes are motile. There is a need of medium for which the male gametes must move. Normally male gamete is motile, female gamete is stationary. But there are algae and fungi in which both the gametes are motile. So there is a need of medium through which the male gametes must move. In several simple plants like algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, water is a medium for gamete transfer. So the main medium for the transfer of the gamete is the water. Now a large number of male gametes however fail to reach the female gametes. Very important thing occurring here is the male gametes though motile, but most of the majority of the male gametes they fail to reach the female gamete, and due to that reason or to compensate this loss of the male gametes, large number of male gametes are produced, or you can say the number of male gametes produced will be 1000 times the number of the female gametes produced. So to compensate this loss of the male gametes during the transport, the number of male gametes produced is several thousand times the number of the female gametes produced. Now this is a diagram showing the homogametic contact in the alga. So basically homogametes, see here you can see that both the gametes are similar morphologically. They are fused, they resulted in the formation of the zygote, and this is the new individual formed. Clear? Now, in seed plants, the pollen grains are the carriers of male gamete and ovules have the egg. So, where are male gametes produced in flowering or seed plants? In pollen grains. And where is egg present? In the ovule. Pollen grains produced in anthers therefore have to be transferred to stigma before it can lead to fertilization. So, where are male gametes? In pollen grains. So, these pollen grains they need to be shed before they can lead to the fertilization. Hence, they need to be transferred to the stigma. In bisexual self-fertilizing plants, bisexual plants are which plants? Which have both male and female reproductive organs in the same body, and self-fertilizing, that is the same, or you can say the male gamete produced by the plant will fertilize the egg of the same plant. So that is self-fertilizing. Like P, the transfer of pollen to the stigma is relatively easy as anther and stigma are located close to each other. So here what happens, those plants which are bisexual and self-fertilizing, in them the transfer of pollen to the stigma is very easy because the anther and stigma they are located very nearer to each others. Pollen grains soon after they are shed, that is immediately after the release of pollen grains they come in contact with the stigma. But now what in the cross-pollinating plants? So in cross-pollinating including the dioecious plant, there is a specialized event called pollination which will facilitate the transfer of the pollen grains to the stigma. So in cross-pollinating plants, the process for the gamete transfer is pollination. Pollen grains germinate on stigma and the pollen tube carrying the male gamete reach the ovule and discharge the male gametes near the egg. So, in cross-pollinating plants, which process occurs for the transfer of the male gamete? It is the pollination. In dioecious animals, since male and female gametes are formed in different individuals, the organisms must evolve a special mechanism for gamete transfer. Like in human beings, the process of the copulation and insemination may act as the process for the gamete transfer. Successful transfer and coming together of gamete is essential for the most critical event of sexual reproduction, that is fertilization. So one of most important process of the sexual reproduction is fertilization. But very important, for the process of fertilization to occur, very important thing that must occur is the successful transfer of the gametes. If gametes do not transfer, there won't be the process of fertilization. So that is regarding the gamete transfer. Here you can see the germinating pollen grains on the stigma of the flower. Clear? And this is the diagram which shows where the pollen grains will land, where the process of fertilization will take place. So this is the ovule, which this will have the embryo sac, and within that the fertilization process will take place. Now next process is the fertilization. The most vital event of sexual reproduction is fusion of gametes. So what is fertilization? How can we define it? The fusion of male and female gametes is called fertilization, which is also called as syngamy. This process is called syngamy, which results in the formation of diploid zygote. So the process of fusion of the male and female gamete resulting in the formation of the diploid zygote is called as what? Fertilization. The term fertilization is also often used for this process. So syngamy and fertilization, they are the same terms which are used interchangeably. The terms syngamy and fertilization are frequently used though interchangeably. Now what would happen in syngamy does not occur. What would happen in the sexually reproducing organism if the process of fertilization does not occur? Now we know that syngamy is a process of fusion of male gamete with egg resulting in the formation of zygote, and it is the zygote which will lead to the development of the offspring. So if fertilization or if syngamy does not occur, there won't be no zygote formation, and as there is no zygote formation, there won't be the new offspring produced or new generation produced. So if syngamy does not take place, there will be no zygote formation, hence no new generation produced. Now, there is one method of the reproduction. Actually, this is a process of asexual reproduction, but it involves the formation of the gamete. In the definition of the asexual reproduction, we have studied the process of the reproduction which is either with or without the formation of the gametes involving single parent. We have seen that. So parthenogenesis is a asexual reproduction involving the formation of the gametes. So parthenogenesis, Greek word parthenos means virgin, genesis means to produce. So in some organisms like rotifers, honeybees, some lizards and birds like turkey, the female gamete undergo development to form the new organisms without fertilization. So in simple terms, what we can say, the development of an egg into the new organisms without the process of fertilization is called as the parthenogenesis. Now female gamete में डेवलपमेंट हो रहा है. So basically the female gamete undergo directly the mitotic division and forms the new individual. So of course the organism is directly formed from the female gamete, and we know that gametes are haploid. So the individuals which are formed as a result of the parthenogenesis will be always haploid. Very important thing. The individuals formed through the parthenogenesis are always haploid because they are formed from directly from the female gamete without fertilization. So this phenomenon is called parthenogenesis, that is development of an egg into complete individual without fertilization. We can say that parthenogenesis is a type of asexual reproduction, and the organisms which are developed through parthenogenesis are always haploid. Clear, students? Now, let us study the types of fertilization. So, basically there are, depending upon where the process of fertilization, where the process of fusion is taking place, on that basis there are two types of fertilization: external fertilization and internal fertilization. So, the fusion of the male and female gamete, if it takes place outside the body of the female organism in the water medium, it is called as external fertilization, whereas if the fusion of the male and female gametes takes place within the body of the female organism, it is called as the internal fertilization. So, where does syngamy occur, or which are the different types of fertilization? External fertilization. In most aquatic organisms like majority of algae and fishes, as well as in amphibians, the syngamy occurs in the external medium, that is water, that is outside the body of the organism. So, that process is called as external fertilization. Process of fertilization occurring outside the body of the organism in the external medium like water is called the external fertilization. The organisms exhibiting external fertilization shows great synchrony between the sexes and release large number of gametes into the surrounding medium, that is water, in order to enhance the chance of syngamy. So, there is the synchrony between the sexes, as well as there will be the release of large number of gametes, because the chances of the syngamy will be enhanced. This happens in bony fishes and frogs, where a large number of offsprings are produced. A major disadvantage is that the offsprings are extremely vulnerable to predators threatening their life or threatening their survival up to adulthood. Now, as the fertilization is taking place outside the body of the female organism, and as they are fertilized outside the body in the water, their developmental chances are very less, because some predator organisms will eat them. Clear? Now, internal fertilization. In many terrestrial organisms belonging to fungi, higher plants such as animals such as reptiles, birds, mammals, and majority of the plants like bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, and angiosperm, the syngamy occurs inside the body of the organism, and hence that process is called internal fertilization. So, if the fusion of the gametes occur within the body of the female organism, it is called as the internal fertilization. In all these organisms, the egg is formed inside the female body, where they fuse with the male gamete. In the organisms exhibiting the internal fertilization, the male gamete is motile and has to reach the egg in order to fuse with it. So, in most of the organisms which undergoes the internal fertilization, in them male gamete is motile and it has to reach the female gamete to fuse with it. In this, even though number of sperms produced is very large, there is a significant reduction in the number of eggs produced. In the internal fertilization, the number of the sperms produced will be very large compared to the number of egg produced. In seed plants, however, the non-motile male gametes are carried to the female gamete by pollen tubes. We have seen that in internal fertilization, normally the male gametes are motile, but in seed plants, male gametes are also non-motile. So, female gamete तो non-motile है ही है, but the male gametes in the seed plants are also non-motile. So, in them the male gametes are basically present in the pollen grains, and these pollen grains are carried, or you can say the male gametes are carried by the pollen tubes of the pollen grain to the female gamete. Now, the post-fertilization events. Post-fertilization. Post means after. So, all the events in the sexual reproduction after the formation of the zygote are called as post-fertilization event. So, it includes the development of zygote, that is the zygote formation, and next one is embryogenesis, that is formation of embryo. So, first one is the zygote. Formation of the diploid zygote is universal in all sexually reproducing organisms. Any organism which produces sexually will result in the formation of the zygote which is diploid. In organisms with external fertilization. So, if the fertilization have taken place in external medium, of course, the zygote will be also formed in the external medium. Whereas the organisms which have undergone internal fertilization, in them the zygote will be formed inside the body of the organism. So, zygote is formed in the external medium, usually water, in the organisms exhibiting external fertilization, whereas those organisms which exhibit internal fertilization, in them the zygote will be formed inside the body. Now, further development of the zygote depends upon the life cycle of the organism and the environment it is exposed to. Now, the development of the zygote depends upon the life cycle of the organisms as well as the environment in which the organism is found. Now, like in organisms belonging to algae and fungi, the zygote develops a thick wall that is resistant to desiccation and damage. So, algae and fungi, they produces a thick wall surrounding the zygote which prevents them against desiccation, that is dryness and damage. It undergoes a period of rest before germination. So, basically always the zygote will form a thick wall, and before germination this thick wall formation is necessary, and after that only, that is, it will undergo period of rest, and after that only it will germinate. Now, in organisms with heplantic life cycle, so those basically here we are mainly concerned with the plants. So, those plant or those organisms which have heplantic life cycle. What is heplantic life cycle? Most of the stages in the life cycle are haploid. Only the zygote will be the stage which will be diploid. So, in such organism the zygote divide by meiosis. हमने देखा those organisms which have haploid body. So, in them zygote which is diploid cell will undergo meiosis, and that meiosis result in the formation of haploid spores, and these haploid spores will form the haploid body. The zygote undergoes meiosis to form the haploid spores that grow into the haploid individuals. Whereas in the organisms with diplontic life cycle is all the stages are diploid except for the gametes which are haploid. So, zygote will undergo mitotic division and it will form the diploid organism. The zygote undergoes mitotically to produce a multicellular diploid individual. Whereas in the individuals with haplodiplontic life cycle, the zygote divides mitotically to form the diploid sporophyte. This sporophyte creates the spores via meiosis, which also divide mitotically to produce the haploid individuals called gametophyte. So, sporophyte will be formed as a result of the zygotic mitosis. This sporophyte will undergo meiosis, will form the spores. These spores will divide mitotically and it will form the gametophyte. Now, this gametophyte will form the gamete by the process of mitosis. So, that is important thing in the haplontic life cycle. Very important thing, zygote is a vital link that ensures the continuity of the species between the organisms of one generation to the next. So, zygote is the main link which maintains the continuity of the species from one generation to the next. If zygote formation does not occur, there won't be the continuity of the species. Every sexually reproducing organisms including human being begin their life as a single cell, that is zygote. So, all the sexually reproducing organisms begins their life with a single cell structure called as the zygote. Now, next process is embryogenesis. So, embryogenesis refers to the process of development of the embryo from zygote. Genesis is formation, and that process of formation of embryo is called embryogenesis. Now, two important things occur during the process of embryogenesis. That is, the zygote undergoes cell division, mainly mitosis. In the haplontic organism, it will be meiosis. Otherwise, in most of the organisms, zygote undergoes cell division, that is mitotic division, and cell differentiation. Cell differentiation is maturation. The cells gets organized into tissues, tissues get organized into organs which form the organisms, right. So what is the importance of cell division? Cell division increases the number of cells in the developing embryo, whereas cell differentiation helps the group of cells to undergo modifications to form specialized tissues and organs to form an organisms. So two important processes occurring during the embryogenesis are cell division and cell differentiation. Cell division leads to the increase in the number of cells in the developing embryo, whereas cell differentiation will form the tissues and organs which ultimately will form the complete organisms. Now, where the development of the zygote takes place, zygote ka formation either will be occurring inside the body or it may be outside. But now where the development of the zygote occurs, on that basis the animals are divided into two categories. Animals are categorized into oviparous and viviparous based on whether the development of the zygote takes place outside the body of the female or inside, that is they lay fertilized or unfertilized egg or give rise to the birth one. So basically animals are categorized into two categories. One is oviparous animals, they are the animals which lay the egg which may be fertilized or infertilized, and viviparous organisms are the organisms which gives birth to the young ones. So oviparous animals, they are animals like reptiles and birds where the fertilized egg gets covered by the hard calcareous shells. They are laid in the safe place in the environment. After a period of incubation, young ones hatch out. So what are oviparous? The animals, the egg laying animals are called as the oviparous animals. If the fertilized eggs are hatched, basically they are laid, they will be covered by the calcareous shell, and after the period of incubation, after the period of development, the young ones hatch out. Whereas in viviparous animals, like majority of the animals including mammals including humans, the zygote develops into young one inside the body of the female organisms. After attaining the certain age of growth, the young ones are delivered outside the body of the female organisms. Because of the proper embryonic care and protection, the chances of survival of the young one is greater in viviparous organism. Now, as the development of the zygote occurs outside in the oviparous organisms, their survival chances are less. But as in the viviparous animals, proper embryonic care and protection is observed, and hence the chances of the survival of the young one will be more in viviparous compared to the oviparous animals. These are some of the differences. The animals that lay egg are oviparous, whereas which gives birth are viviparous. The zygote develops outside the body of the female in ovipary, whereas zygote develops inside the female reproductive tract in viviparous. The eggs are laid in water or moist land and the chances of survival are less, whereas the chances of survival of the newborn are more because it is developed inside the female. These are other few differences between oviparous and viviparous animals. So first of all, their difference: lay fertilized or unfertilized egg in oviparous, whereas they give birth to the young ones while their development takes place within the body of the female. Type of fertilization: it may be either external or internal, whereas in viviparous it is always internal. Development of the zygote: so embryo development occurs outside the embryo, whereas embryo development occurs inside the embryo, or you can say inside the female body. Okay. Now supply of the nutrients. So embryo obtain nutrients from the egg yolk, whereas in the viviparous the nutrients are obtained from the mother. There are less chances of survival because the egg laying occurs in the external environment, whereas due to high nourishment and care is provided inside the womb of the mother, the chances of survival is more. Examples are fish, amphibians, insect, birds, reptile, humans, dog, elephants, cat, etc. in the viviparous one. Now, let us see some post-fertilization changes occurring in the flower. In the flowering plants, a zygote is formed inside ovules. After fertilization, most parts of the flower, that is sepals, petals and stamen, they will wither and fall off. They fall off. But pistil remains attached to the embryo. Okay, it remains attached to the plants. What are the changes? The zygote will form the embryo, the ovules will form the seeds, the ovary will form the fruit, whereas the ovary wall, it develops a thick wall called as the pericarp. This pericarp is also called as the fruit wall, and its function is protective nature. After the dispersal, seeds germinate under favorable condition to produce the new plants. So these are some of the changes occurring in the flower after the process of fertilization. Here you can see a few kinds of fruits which are shown. S indicates the seed and P indicates the pericarp. Clear? And these are the post fertilization event. This is the flower. Inside the flower is the ovary and ovules. These ovules is converted into seeds and ovary is converted into fruits after the process of fertilization. Now these are some of the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. So when the offsprings are born without the contribution of the another organism of the same species is called as asexual reproduction. That is, only one organism is involved, whereas when the offsprings are born with the help of another organism of same species but of opposite sex, it is called as sexual reproduction. Organisms reproduce by binary fission, fragmentation, budding, spore formation, etc. Normally here there will be syngamy, and another type is conjugation. Asexual reproduction is uniparental, sexual is biparental. In asexual organism, the organisms divide by mitosis. In sexual reproduction, both mitosis and meiosis occurs. In asexual reproduction, only somatic cells are involved. In sexual reproduction, germ cells are involved. It occurs in lower organisms, unicellular organisms and lower invertebrates with simple structures. It occurs in higher plants and animals. In asexual reproduction, there is no fusion of gametes, whereas in the sexual reproduction, there is fusion of gametes. The cells multiply very rapidly in very less period of time in asexual reproduction, whereas sexual reproduction takes longer time. There is no fertilization in asexual reproduction, whereas fertilization occurs in sexual reproduction. So these are a few differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. Now let us see the difference between zoospore and zygote. So basically zoospore, we know it is a structure which is involved in the asexual reproduction, whereas zygote is formed as a result of sexual reproduction. Zoospore is normally thin walled, whereas zygote is thick walled, and it helps to resist damage and desiccation. Zoospore will have flagella for locomotion, whereas zygote is non-motile. It is formed during favorable conditions and germinates immediately, whereas the zygote may undergo the period of dormancy in algae and fungi. Now another difference between the zoospore and conidia. So first of all, keep in mind that both of these are asexual reproductive structure, but the difference is the zoospore is flagellated, whereas conidium is non-flagellated. Zoospore is endogenous, that is formed inside the sporangium, whereas conidium is exogenous, which is formed at the tip of the conidiospores. So these are two major difference between the zoospore and conidium. So here we come to the end of this chapter, that is the reproduction in organisms. In the next chapter we will be studying how the sexual reproduction occurs in the flowering plants. So the name of the chapter is sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Thank you, students.